Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio. Welcome to Policy and Rights, the show about government policy and human rights. Welcome back to Policy and Rights here in Depictions Media Radio. I'm your host, Michael Clogs. Okay, we all heard about the proposed assassination attempt on Donald Trump, and as a result of that assassination attempt, the director of the Secret Service, Kim Cheatle, found herself in front of a hearing. Congressmen who want answers as to why wasn't Donald Trump protected, and what happened that a lone gunman could find his way into the Republican Party rally where Donald Trump was about to speak, and why was he allowed to appear on stage if they knew that there was a suspicious person in the audience? Well, some of the answers is like, how do you define a suspicious person versus an actual threat? And which Ms. Cheatle does her best to answer that question, because it is the difference between splitting hairs and split-second decisions. What the Secret Service does in order to protect U.S. national and international visiting leaders is a matter of split-second decision-making. The fact that the lone gunman was not successful in actually assassinating Donald Trump does show that the Secret Service did their job. That was to protect their charge. And to protect their charge at the cost of your own life. They did exactly what they were supposed to do, and they used themselves to shield Mr. Trump from harm. There are some questions that I still have if Mr. Trump's assassination attempt was not actually staged, and that he actually hired somebody so that he could play act at being assassinated. But we're going to have to allow those opinions to go and report on the fact that the actions that happened that day are now actually tugging and pulling at one of the institutions that protects important political figures from harm, including President Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, as well as each and every person that is sitting asking questions of Ms. Cheatle has a detail and attached to them to keep them out of harm from the Secret Service. What happened that day is being addressed as an absolute failure on her part, but the reality of it is that Kim Cheatle, as the director of the Secret Service, and under her command, the Secret Service performed their job brilliantly and protected the former president, Donald Trump, from harm. We forget the fact that the bullet did actually miss the target. And that is the job of the Secret Service, is to ensure that the bullet does not actually reach its target and fatally wound a VIP, a senator, former president, or a foreign political leader or global leaders from harm. So the Secret Service did actually do their job in this case, and they performed their duties with brilliance and all due valor. So the fact that there does need to be an investigation as to what actually happened, so that the person who did actually pull the trigger, that his movements are followed, so that they can track to make sure that he was alone and wasn't part of a bigger group. That does need to happen, and the FBI and Department of Homeland Security does need to actually be involved in figuring all that out. The fact that the person did make it into the room does need to have an internal investigation by the Secret Service, so that such things can be prevented again. But stringing up Ms. Cheatle on and putting her on such a hot seat the way it is actually happening, when you actually hear part of the question and answer that she goes through, may not have been called for. That she should be answering questions so that we learn who this person was that made the attack, and that we learn more about those who would want to try to put an end to the U.S. Republic as a democratic society. So we'll get to that part after we actually listen to some of the recordings from the UN, as we're going to hear more about humanitarian efforts that the United States is going to be part of, as well as we're going to hear about a new push to put an end to what was a global pandemic on AIDS. The discovery of AIDS has hit an anniversary, and there is a new push to find better treatments and the hopes of finding a cure to the HIV virus that is thought to actually cause AIDS itself. So why don't we start there with the latest push for health in our human society, with trying to put an end to the harm that AIDS actually does to members of our society who actually would become infected. And then we'll hear about more humanitarian efforts from Linda Greenfield, ambassador to the United Nations, and then the recordings from Kim Cheatle. Kim Cheatle's hearing on the Trump assassination attempt.
Again, greetings. We're delighted to be joined by Cesar Nunez, the director of the UNAIDS office here in New York, who's here to present you the launch of the latest UNAIDS report. So, Cesar, please, you have the floor, and then we'll take some questions.
Thank you so much, Stefan, and thank you all for being here once more. We have in the back copies of the press release and the fact sheet that may be useful for you. As some of you may be aware, the International AIDS Conference that is held every 2 years is being launched tonight in Germany, Munich, with Chancellor Scholz as a keynote speaker. UNAIDS took the opportunity to launch our 2024 Global AIDS Update earlier today. And in that report, we provide some updates on the statistics around the world regarding the achievement from member states in the last year. Those achievements include, for instance, that at the end of December 2023, 30.7 million people were accessing antiretroviral treatment. That is 7.7 million up from 2010, but still short of the 34 million target that we have for 2025. In terms of new infections, they have been reduced by 60% since the peak in 1995. And in 2023, 1.3 million people were newly infected with HIV compared to 3.3 million in 1995. So that's a significant, as I said, reduction, 60%. Because of advances in treatment and the reductions of new infections, of course, we also have a reduction in the number of deaths. In 2023, around 630 people died from AIDS-related illnesses worldwide, compared to 2.1 million back in 2004 and 1.3 million in 2010. The target for 2025 is fewer than 250%. The last statistics that I will refer to, and then I'll go into some messages that we are delivering in the report, deals with investments. At the end of 2023, 19.8 billion, this is in constant 2019 US dollars, was available for the AIDS response in low and middle income countries. That's about 60% of those coming from domestic resources. So funding for HIV dropped by 5% from 2022 to 2023, and by 7.9% between 2020 and 2023. And that is one of the challenges that I will make references to.
Also a bagel for you.
Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry.
10 minutes.
Looks like
Yes.
someone is ordering
Yeah,
bagels.
go ahead.
Good. Bagels for everyone.
Yeah.
So what I was saying is the HIV response is far from over. And even if the world succeeds in ending AIDS as a public health threat by 2030, over 30 million people will be living with HIV in 2050. This is something we do not always think about. You know, people who are already living with HIV that will require treatment because the current therapy keeps them alive. So good news. In general, you may recall that during the launch of the 2024 SDG report here with the Secretary General and USG Lee, he talked about 17% of implementation of the SDGs, but he also referred to SDG 3.3 as a glimmer of hope. I've shown you some of that hope in the figures that I've listed, but again, the world is not on track. Global new HIV infections in our report are shown as not declining fast enough, and in 3 regions of the world in particular, infections are rising: Eastern Europe and Central Asia, the Middle East and North Africa, and Latin America. Failure to end AIDS would lead to millions of preventable deaths and endanger the health and security of all. Our report, as I was saying, makes a call for 3 specific actions. Number one, resource the response. I already mentioned the gap in the amount of resources that are needed. There have been continued cuts. A widening funding gap is holding back the HIV response, particularly in low and middle income countries. And the widening funding gap is holding back the HIV response there. Again, $9.5 billion short each year compared to the expectations. We believe that part of that it's that we need to tackle the debt crisis. Countries are not investing enough in health and on education because they need to address the health crisis. Half of the countries in sub-Saharan Africa are either in debt distress or at high risk of it, spending on average 3 times more on repaying debt services than they do on health. For instance, in Angola, Kenya, Malawi, Rwanda, Uganda, and Zambia, debt servicing exceeds 50% of government revenues. So I emphasize here the need for restructuring the financial system. This is a message that you have heard from other colleagues in the room and, of course, from the Secretary General himself. We need to close the funding gap for HIV treatment and prevention. And, of course, underscore the countries' need to concentrate resources on these. We feel that, and you were discussing just about that a few minutes ago, the impact of conflict on service delivery and the importance of addressing the needs of displaced populations. We have conflicts in all continents of the world. We have displaced people in need, of course, of food, of clothing, and housing, but medication, particularly those who are living with HIV. The political panorama in terms of 65 countries, I believe that it was mentioned here sometime in the back, 65 electoral processes taking place in 2024. For us, we feel that we must remain strong with the political commitments and underscore the importance of maintaining the gains in HIV treatment and prevention amidst the changing of governments. We'll see how we do along those lines. The second message: get long-acting treatment and prevention options to all low and middle-income countries. I wonder how many of you are aware of a new product that is called lenacapavir. This is an injectable. Some of you may recall when people living with HIV had to take so many pills a day to stay alive. I believe last year I was still referring to you to triple therapy in one pill. Well, now we have an injectable every 6 months. Can you imagine that? You take a shot in January, you take another shot in July, and that's it. So innovation is good, but at what cost? We're going back to when we started with the first antiretroviral medications that were so expensive that were not accessible worldwide. Now, access to this long-acting prevention and treatment would be a game-changing breakthrough. Now we're talking about what is a game changer. This would be a game changer in the world. This could transform access to poor people, to people from the key populations, gay men, sex workers, and young women and girls in Africa who could be freed from the stigma and discrimination or fear of being attacked for being seen having the medicine, taking medicine every day. Again, the price is just too high and accessible mostly in high-income countries. Third message: tackle the discrimination and stigma that are pushing the most marginalized people away from health care. Some of you may have noticed the surge in the promotion of anti-rights, anti-gender, and even criminalization of some populations in different countries around the world. This is something that has to stop. People are not able to come to be tested. People are not able to come and collect their treatment or care services. And of course, this actually prevents the response to move forward. We need to save lives, and the countries need to decriminalize. And end the decriminalization faced by girls and women that is driving the AIDS pandemic, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, where 3,200 young girls, adolescent girls, are infected every week. So, but my last point, and it's not necessarily in the report, has to do with you, those of you sitting here or listening in. The role of media. I think it's important that I acknowledge the critical role that you play in keeping the HIV issues, top of mind. And I really appreciate that you stayed for this briefing, and hopefully the messages that I have expressed or that are in the press release will be amplified through your media. I know that there is a lot going on in the world, public crisis. But we also need good news, and we also need to send out these messages that call on the member states, on the leaders of the world, to take the path of solidarity. We have said in the past that the path to end AIDS is well known, and that encompasses commitment, political commitment that comes with budgets. Otherwise, is demagogy. If leaders take the path of solidarity, their legacy will be preventing millions of new infections, saving millions of lives, ensuring healthy and full lives for everyone living with HIV, and keeping all of us safe. We look forward to addressing this at the Summit of the Future next September and see how we can take it from there. Let me stop here. Thank you, Stefan.
Thank you very much, Cesar. Edie?
Thank you very much, Cesar, on behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association for doing this briefing. My name is Edith Lederer from the Associated Press. Before I ask my question, in the beginning you were talking about deaths, and I believe you said 630. Is it 630 or 630,000?
Worldwide.
I think the 1,000.
Maybe I skipped 1,000.
You skipped the 1,000.
You were listening.
Yeah,
I was just checking.
Edie always listens.
Okay. Secondly, on the injectable,
Yes, ma'am.
are any negotiations going on to bring down the prices? And can you give us an update on what's happening with research on vaccines? Thank you.
Thank you, Edith. Can I
Please, go ahead. No.
Yeah. Actually, UNAIDS, it's constantly and insistently advocating with the manufacturer of this particular drug because the research is magnificent. This is a very important, very good drug. And we are asking them to please consider making it available at a lower price to low and middle-income countries. The issue here is that most of the people living with HIV live in middle-income or upper middle-income countries, but that doesn't mean that they're rich. They're usually very poor, but that's where they live. So UNAIDS is making that ask. Please announce a reduced price for countries that need to be able to access it. And that is something that we will continue advocating for. Vaccines. Since I've started working in HIV more than 30 years ago, I always listen to, a projection of 10 more years before we find a vaccine. I believe that the work that was done during COVID, which was something that we have heard was happening already, is another route that is being taken now by researchers looking at an HIV vaccine. I believe that even this new injectable is sort of going in that direction because twice a year, that gives a lot of flexibility to people. So looking forward to the outcome of current research on vaccine and hopefully by the next time I'm here, I'll be able to bring you a more positive answer.
And just for those of us who don't follow this, what's the cost of an injectable for 6 months?
For 1 year is $40,000.
1 4?
40.
40,000.
40. I'm looking at my colleagues in the back, but I believe it's correct. $40,000 a year. Do you remember back in the days when everything was starting? It was $10,000 per person per year. So dollars value has changed, but 40 it's look at the treatment for Hep C. It's $95,000 per person. You do get cured, but it's $1,000 a pill.
Tony,
Thank you, Tony Naddaf, Al Hurra TV. So I'm going to start with you from here, the last remark regarding the $40,000. And I'm going to take you to the low-income countries,
yes,
where people are still unable to access, like, even the preemptive treatment.
Yes.
What is the UNAIDS doing these days to change this reality? That's my first question. And then I want to ask you about you mentioned like 3 areas, 3 regions, actually, Eastern Europe, Central Asia, the Middle East, and North Africa, and Latin American countries as, witnessing a rise in infection. Would you be able to share more about the cause of this rise? And if you have any specific numbers in terms of death or even infections in the Middle East and North Africa precisely?
Absolutely. Without going into all of the numbers, I can tell you that all of the figures are in the press release. But if you need specific, regional data, we can definitely provide it. In UNAIDS, we're always working with access to medicines, and there is a program that is run by the United Nations, WHO, it's Patent Pool, and we work with them to make sure that medications are available to people. Our most significant achievement, I believe, has been with dolutegravir. It's one medication that is being made available to low-income countries. And at the moment, if we leave the injectables aside for one moment, a public health system can procure dolutegravir for about $75 per person per year. This is what has allowed many countries to increase the number of people on treatment. Unfortunately, there's still about 10 million that have not started treatment. And we're going to continue looking for opportunities to make sure that the accessibility in terms of pricing is there. There are partners that are also in the field. The United States Presidential Project, PEPFAR, they actually provide this kind of therapy to countries around the world. We also assist countries in implementation of the World Trade Organization TRIPS flexibilities. Colombia has been one of the countries that most recently exercised their right to have access to dolutegravir precisely. And now they do, because it was incredibly expensive for them to buy. Now, regarding the increase of new infections in these 3 regions, particularly in Eastern Europe and Central Asia, 93% of the new infections in these countries are happening in Russia, Ukraine, Uzbekistan, and Kazakhstan. 8 out of 13 countries in the region reported increases in new infections. So because stigma, discrimination, harmful, punitive laws obstruct marginalized communities' access to vital services. All right? So 94% of the new infections were among people from key populations, including men who have sex with men, people who inject drugs, and sex workers, and the sexual partners of people from the key populations. So this is something that is specific of Eastern Europe and Central Asia. Latin America, which is a region that I'm more familiar with, has had difficulties in education, comprehensive sexuality education. And it seems like the guard has been brought down in terms of prevention. Prevention has dropped a lot. It seems like we have focused a lot more on treatment, and we have left prevention on the side. We need to scale up prevention in most cases of the regions where new infections are coming up.
And the Middle East, any reason why, about the factors behind the rise?
Well, the issue of stigma and discrimination has always been there. And it's perhaps in terms of absolute numbers, it's not that big or large a number, but it does represent an increase for so far. But again, the specific numbers we can provide to you with pleasure.
Gabriel?
Hi, thank you for the briefing. My name is Gabriel Isondo from Al Jazeera. Edie asked a lot of my questions about the injectable, but I'll just follow up. I find it fascinating. You say you're talking to UNAIDS is talking to the manufacturer about trying to bring the price down. What has been their response so far?
They're talking about it. They're discussing. I know that to be fair, there is already an agreed price for low-income countries, and there's always been a list of low-income countries that do benefit from a lower price. However, as I mentioned, it is middle-income and upper-middle-income countries where most people living with HIV reside. And that's where, and these are the countries that I was referring earlier, are having challenges with repaying debt. But just by servicing the debt, they have not enough money to cover for health expenditures. And $40,000 is a lot of money. Yeah. So they would, I'm not saying that staying with dolutegravir at $75 a year per person is not good. I mean, it's actually desirable. Obviously, as we move and innovation helps us take the next leap or the next pivot, it's a direction that we would like the whole world to take.
And is the injectable better? There's the pills and there's the injectable, right?
Yeah.
Is the injectable better treatment, or is it just a more convenient treatment?
It's both good, effective, if I should say that, and convenient. As I was saying, some people have challenges still coming to a health service. Stigma, discrimination, why are you taking that, and so on. So by coming just twice a year, that would take care of that.
Thank you. No other questions? Thank you so much for coming, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Steph.
Next, from the media stakeout floor in the United Nations in New York City, we're going to hear from the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Greenfield, as she talks about the U.S. humanitarian efforts around the world.
Thank you all for being here this morning, and again, good morning to all of you. I've found that numbers like the ones coming out of Sudan are a bit hard to grasp. Over 10 million new forcibly displaced people, including over 2 million who fled to neighboring countries in search of safety. The number of Sudanese refugees in Chad doubled in the first 12 months of the conflict, with more individuals from Sudan fleeing to Chad in 1 year than in the previous 20 combined. And then there's the hunger. 25.6 million people who face crisis or worse levels of food insecurity, a third of them facing emergency conditions. And 750,000 people, women and children, the very old and very young, facing famine, starvation, IPC 5 level conditions. People are eating dirt to survive, relying on tree leaves for nutrition. I've talked before about my experience in Chad last year, meeting just a few of the faces of those numbers. How in the hunger ward of the MSF hospital, children were so weak they lacked the energy to even cry. The room was quiet, totally quiet. That level of suffering is occurring all over Sudan, over and over and over again. I've said at this very podium that this is the worst humanitarian crisis in the world, and that has not changed. And sadly, the silence I heard that day in Chad has been met with even more silence across the world. 3 months after the April 15th pledging conference in Paris, only 2/3 of the pledges have been dispersed, and only about a quarter of the response has been funded. All the while, the Adre border crossing, one of the most important in terms of humanitarian aid flow, continues to be blocked by the SAF. This obstruction is completely unacceptable. To make matters worse, experts predict that the rainy season will decrease already severely restricted cross-border access, all while floodwaters worsen the already dire conditions in IDP camps, putting hundreds of thousands at risk of waterborne diseases. The scale of this crisis is overwhelming, But now is not a moment to throw up our hands. We must continue to fight for the people of Sudan. For our part, since the start of 2024 alone, the United States has committed $500 million to humanitarian assistance in Sudan, aimed at supplying those in need with health and nutrition, education and transit assistance, water and sanitation, shelter, and psychological support. These funds certainly go to those within Sudan, but they also help neighboring countries like Chad and Egypt, South Sudan and Ethiopia, which are taking in more and more asylum seekers and refugees every single day. But we know that need is outpacing funds. Everyone has the responsibility to do more, to give more, if we want to prevent the spread of food insecurity. And so today, I'm proud to announce that the United States Agency for International Development will provide an additional $203 million in funding to the people of Sudan. We hope this new round of aid serves as a call to action for others to follow. Partners will use this funding to build new shelter for refugees or provide cash assistance so that they can pay rent. And it will help children whose lives have been upended by conflict return to school. It will provide emergency food assistance to those who are starving. It will offer medical assistance through mobile clinics, emergency obstetric and neonatal care, and psychological support to people traumatized by violence. And it will help host communities, many of whom face their own challenges as they open their arms and their homes to Sudanese refugees. Look, this money is not a panacea. And so in addition to funding the response to this crisis, we will continue to work steadfastly to address the root causes, to press for more cross-border and cross-line access, to hold those committing violence accountable, and most of all, most importantly, to continue diplomatic efforts to find a path to peace, to bring this horrific conflict to an end and put Sudan back on the path to democracy, stability, and security. And I will say here again, the Security Council should consider all tools at its disposal, including authorizing aid to move from critical crossings, like at the Adre border into Sudan, as we had once done with cross-border aid into Syria. I'm grateful for all of those partners joining us in this work and undertaking their own individual efforts to end this horrific situation. And with that, I'll take a couple of questions.
Thank you very much, Madam Ambassador. In war-torn Sudan, how is the United States going to be able to monitor the use of this money to make sure that it gets to the people in need? And in terms of the lack of actual money from people who pledged, why isn't a list put out of the names of
name and shame
countries
list
that have pledged and have not come up with the money?
Good. Well, thank you. In terms of monitoring, we take our monitoring responsibilities very seriously. Of course, in a situation of war, that's harder to do. But we have reliable partners on the ground who are ensuring that this assistance is getting to people in need. And the reason I know they're doing that, they were doing it without our money. They were there working hard, desperately supporting people in need with no money from us. So we have confidence that they will use this money as we have asked them to do, and as soon as we're able to get our own people in to do direct monitoring, we will certainly do that. I hear you about naming and shaming. What we want to do is press those people to deliver rather than shame them. And so I can assure you we're constantly pressing those countries who made commitments, who made pledges, to deliver on their pledges.
Ambassador, I'm sure the people of Sudan thanks the United States for such a generous and timely donation, and we hope that the rest of the world follow suit and fulfill their pledges. We have been receiving and reading about reports coming from the region, and very worrying one, about the expansion, possibility of expansion of this conflict to countries like Ethiopia, which start making noises that it might get involved. And also there are other reports of talking about the Sudanese army being on the verge of collapse. Can you shed any light on any of these reports if you have the information?
Yeah, we worry, and we do more than worry, about the possibility of this conflict expanding in the region. And it's why we're so actively engaged with our partners in the region to get them actively engaged in finding a solution. As you know, there were several efforts through Jeddah to bring the warring parties to the negotiating table. There are efforts, as you know, ongoing right now by the Secretary General's personal envoy to get the warring parties to come to the table. And my call is for those who have influence on the warring parties to press them, to urge them to come to the table, because until they come to the table, the people of Sudan will continue to suffer. There is no military solution to this situation. I have not seen the reports on the SAF collapsing. What I'm seeing is that they continue to fight. And the more they fight, the more people suffer. So we have to pressure not just the SAF and the RSF, we have to pressure their supporters, and we have to pressure those in the region who are being affected by this, who might get caught in the crossfire, to continue to engage to find a solution.
We have time for one more. Thank you. Ambassador, you talked before about the cross-border mechanism and that the U.S. has engaged on high level with the Sudanese authorities on this idea. Do you have any progress to share with us? And if I may, on Gaza, we read about a possibility of deployment of international presence in Gaza. As part of these discussions, do you have anything to share with us?
On the cross-border mechanism, yes, we have engaged with the SAF. I've engaged with the PR here. Others are engaging. Tom Perriello, our special envoy, has been there pressing them to open Adre for the delivery of humanitarian assistance. They keep saying the right things, but they have not yet opened that border crossing, which is why we think we may need some kind of mechanism to get the border crossing open. On Gaza, there are numerous discussions about the day after and what will be required in terms of security and stability forces when this conflict comes to an end. I can't share any details on that. What we're focused on, as I say constantly, we're focused on today and trying to address the dire humanitarian situation, the suffering that we see happening right now. I do hope that we get to the day after the ceasefire resolution deal that President Biden put on the table is still being worked on. Negotiators are still there. We're still hopeful that we will get there. I mentioned in the Security Council yesterday, now that both sides have accepted this, and now we're at the stage of working out some of the fine details of what they have asked for. If we can get there, that will allow for hostages to get home, for humanitarian relief to start getting to people in need. We can talk about the day after. Thank you.
Can I ask you a question about Burkina Faso?
I don't know that I can answer, but I'll try.
At the end of May, 400 people were killed by the army, and the journalists have been
Thank you for asking that question. And the reason I appreciate your asking that question is this is another one of those forgotten conflicts that we're not talking enough about. The numbers of people being killed, the numbers of people who are living in fear continue to increase. And we have pressed the junta there to start to address the situation that will allow for a transitional government to take their place and start to deal with some of the root causes of the situation on the ground. And it's something I can assure you that I will continue to follow. So I appreciate your raising it and pushing my button on that one. Thank you. Thank you.
And we're going to hear now from Kim Cheatle's hearing on the Trump assassination attempt as she answers questions to some of Congress at a hearing that she was subpoenaed to be at, as she also says that she was fully willing to show up and answer the questions as best she can without interrupting an ongoing investigation or revealing assets that are needed to the Secret Service so that they can get the job done and protect global leaders as they're visiting the United States, and also political leaders of the United States, such as Donald Trump, Kamala Harris, and Joe Biden.
I want to welcome everyone here today, and I know we also want to welcome Speaker Johnson, who is also in attendance today. Without objection, the chair may declare a recess at any time. I now recognize myself for the purpose of making an opening statement, but first, without objection, Representative Mills of Florida and Representative Miller of Ohio are waived onto the committee for the purpose of questioning the witness at today's hearing. Without objection to order. Good morning. Today's hearing is for the American people who are seeking answers about the attempted assassination of President Trump. A little over a week ago, Americans watched in horror as a shooter attempted to assassinate President Donald J. Trump at a campaign rally. The gunman nearly succeeded. The bullet that struck President Trump's head was less than an inch from taking his life. But one rallygoer, Corey Comparator, tragically did not. Two others were seriously injured. The was exceeded only by the bravery of the law enforcement agents who threw themselves in harm's way when shots were fired. The bravery of a crowd unwavering in its refusal to panic, and the bravery of a bloody President Trump refusing to run. While we give overwhelming thanks to the individual Secret Service agents who did their jobs under immense pressure, this tragedy was preventable. The Secret Service's protective mission is to protect U.S. and visiting world leaders and safeguard U.S. elections through protection of candidates and nominees. The Secret Service has a zero-fail mission, but it failed on July 13th and in the days leading up to the rally. The Secret Service has thousands of employees and a significant budget, but it has now become the face of incompetence. The committee has a long track record of providing oversight of the Secret Service. Our predecessors, both Jason Chaffetz and Elijah Cummings, among others, worked together to issue warnings and recommendations to address obvious shortcomings in the agency's makeup and operations. Unfortunately, those warnings and recommendations have gone unheeded. A former president and current candidate for president was shot in the head by a sniper within 500 feet of the podium. This is unacceptable, and we are concerned the Secret Service lacks the proper management to keep protectees safe from bad actors. Americans demand answers. but they have not been getting them from the Secret Service. We are instead learning about new facts about the events surrounding the attempted assassination every day from whistleblowers and leaks. Americans demand accountability, but no one is yet to be fired for this historic failure. Today's witness, Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheatle, is here under subpoena to answer questions about how the agency failed President Trump and the victims who attended the rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. It is my firm belief, Director Cheatle, that you should resign. However, in complete defiance, Director Cheatle has maintained she will not tender her resignation. Therefore, she will answer questions today from members of this committee seeking to provide clarity to the American people about how these events were allowed to transpire. We will ask these questions because the Secret Service and its parent agency, the Department of Homeland Security, have been unwilling to provide answers to the American people. DHS has sought to push this hearing to a different time. Secret Service has suggested the hearing occur without media presence, and both agencies have provided only shallow explanations to Congress about what happened on July 13th. Indeed, DHS and Secret Service's lack of communication with the Oversight Committee required me to issue a subpoena compelling Director Cheatle to attend today, and still DHS requested more time to prepare. It shouldn't take this much time or preparation, Director Cheatle, to tell the truth and to be transparent with the American people. I am thankful to the ranking member, Mr. Raskin, for joining me and insisting that Director Cheatle appear today. God knows the ranking member and I disagree on many things, but that does not matter today. The safety of Secret Service protectees is not based on their political affiliation, and the bottom line is that under Director Cheatle's leadership, we question whether anyone is safe. Not President Biden, not the First Lady, not the White House, and certainly not the presidential candidates. The July 13th assassination attempt is one of the darkest days in American political history. It represents the ugliest parts of what American politics has become: hatred of each other and a dangerous turn to extremism. Before we were Republicans or Democrats, we are Americans. If we place our political affiliations above our duty and love of country, we cannot maintain a country. We must ensure our republic is strong, and our republic cannot be strong when our leadership, our elections, our institutions, and our candidates are threatened by extremism and violence. Today, Director Cheatle will answer questions about why she deserves to continue to play a critical role in preserving this country's safety and, at the very least, what led to the catastrophic, deadly events on July 13th in Butler, Pennsylvania. Again, I do not believe Director Cheatle deserves to maintain her position as head of the Secret Service, but members of the American people will make their own decisions based on her answers today. I urge Director Cheatle to be transparent and forthcoming in her testimony today. Americans deserve no less. We have a duty to find out how this happened and to ensure it never happens again. I now yield to Ranking Member Raskin for his opening statement.
Thank you kindly, Chairman Comer. Elijah Cummings, whose beautiful visage looks down upon us, taught us that the way to find common ground in a crisis is to look for the higher ground. And last week, Chairman Comer and I came together to reach for that higher ground. We made a joint statement condemning the mass shooting and assassination attempt against former President Trump as a grave assault on our democracy. As we wrote, we are united in condemning all political violence. I join the good chairman in expressing condolences to the family of Corey Comparatori and in sending healing wishes to the wounded victims also of this atrocious act of violence. Some are calling it a miracle that former President Trump escaped this AR-15 attack, unlike so many thousands of our fellow citizens who have been killed or seriously wounded in other AR-15 shootings. Whether this miracle is of divine providence or of an adventitious nature will be up to each of us to ponder, but our job in Congress is not simply to marvel at miracles or count on good luck, but to act as public policy legislators to do whatever we can to prevent future political violence, attempted assassinations, and mass shootings. The chairman and I are thus determined to get to the bottom of the stunning security failures that enabled this 20-year-old lone gunman who borrowed his father's AR-15 to perpetrate a mass shooting and assassination attempt at an event protected by the Secret Service as well as state and local police. We'll ask hard questions of Director Cheatle today in order to identify and understand the shocking security failures that occurred and to help transform the operations of the Secret Service to prevent anything like this from happening again. But we can't let ourselves off the hook either, dear colleagues. What happened in Butler, Pennsylvania was a double failure. The failure by the Secret Service to properly protect former President Trump and the failure of Congress to properly protect our people from criminal gun violence. We must therefore also ask hard questions about whether our laws are making it too easy for potential assassins to obtain firearms generally and the AR-15 specifically. Mr. Comparatore, former President Trump, and the other rally attendees wounded in Butler are now members of a club no one wants to belong to, the thousands of people who have fallen victim to mass shootings. Last year, we had 655 mass shootings in America, defined as 4 or more people being shot or killed in a single event, not including the shooter. 712 people died and nearly 2,700 people were wounded in these attacks in 2023. Mass shootings are commonplace. They happen at political rallies and constituent meetings, in our elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools, in churches, synagogues, and mosques, in movie theaters and parades, in nightclubs and grocery stores, in concerts, and on street corners. Here are the worst mass shootings in the last 11 or 12 years. The list is a grim reminder of the horrific damage and death wrought by assault weapons and the AR-15 in particular that have taken the lives of our children, parents, colleagues, and neighbors. This is a very partial list. Mass shootings have become so frequent that we don't even hear about them anymore. Since the mass shooting in Butler, there have already been at least 10 additional mass shootings in America, 2 of which took place the same day that former President Trump was targeted. One of the mass shootings on that violent Saturday, July 13th, happened at 11 p.m. at a nightclub in Birmingham, Alabama, where 4 people were shot dead and 10 others wounded. This means, amazingly, that the Butler attack was not even the deadliest mass shooting to happen in America on that day. A weapon that can be used to commit a mass shooting at an event under the full protection of the Secret Service, together with dozens of state and local police, is obviously an intolerable threat to the rest of us who do not receive such protection and obviously does not belong in our communities. It's time to pass universal background checks and build on this administration's work to ensure that we permanently close the loopholes in the Brady law for gun show purchases, online purchases, and private sales to prevent those weapons from getting into the hands of people we know to be a threat to others. What happened in Butler shows why even closing these loopholes, however, will not keep assault weapons out of the hands of potential assassins and mass murderers. Under federal law and in the vast majority of states, even young people not old enough to buy a beer legally can legally purchase and own the AR-15 and carry it in public. The shooter in Butler used his father's AR-15. We have to find the courage and resolve to pass a ban on the AR-15 and other assault weapons. A ban has broad support. Even the New York Post loudly endorsed such a ban in 2019. We have passed an assault weapons ban before. Republicans and Democrats together passed it in 1994. Alas, in 2004, we allowed the ban to expire. We know this weapons ban worked. One study found that in the decade that followed the ban's lapse, mass shootings went back up 183%, and deaths from mass shootings went up 239%. But even as we change the Secret Service and act to ban weapons of war like the AR-15, we still will have fallen short of our duty if we fail to denounce every instance of politically motivated violence in whatever form it takes. Republicans and Democrats, again, have come together to denounce this assassination attempt, just as we did the violent attempts on the lives of our colleagues, Representative Stephen Scalise and Representative Gabby Giffords, and on Paul Pelosi, the husband of Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who was attacked and brutalized in his home. And in the immediate aftermath of the January 6th mass violence waged against Congress and the Vice President and the constitutional transfer of power, Democrats and Republicans alike, including Senator McConnell, Chairman Comer, and other colleagues, all denounced this violent assault on our democracy that wounded approximately 140 officers from the U.S. Capitol Police and the Metropolitan Police Department. And I commend them for acting to denounce that attack, just as Democrats moved swiftly to denounce the attack on Congressman Scalise. Political scientists tell us that authoritarian attacks on democratic institutions begin with political parties refusing to disavow or openly embracing political violence. We have to reject that on a strong bipartisan basis, as Chairman Comer and I have done, even as we ensure our Secret Service is up to its vital task of protecting presidents and candidates, and as we work to ensure that America, the streets of our country, are free from the violence of weapons of war. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back to you.
Thank you. Gentleman yields back. Today we are joined by Kimberly Cheatle, who was sworn into office on September 17, 2022 as the Director of the United States Secret Service. Prior to her appointment, Director Cheatle was Senior Director of Global Security at PepsiCo. Before her role at Pepsi, she served 27 years in the Secret Service. Pursuant to Committee Rule 9G, the witness will please stand and raise her right hand. Do you solemnly so help you God? Let the record show that the witness answered in the affirmative. Thank you. We certainly appreciate you being here today and look forward to your testimony. We normally limit testimony to opening statement to 5 minutes, but take all the time that you need. Obviously, the rules that we will abide by, when you're finished with your statement, we will then turn to questions. Each member will have 5 minutes. And just a note to the members, I'm going to strictly adhere to the 5 minutes. Once 5 minutes is up, I will hit the gavel. If the director is in the process of answering a question, we'll certainly let her finish her answers, and then we will move on. We're going to have about 100% attendance here today, plus a few additional add-ons. So this will be a very lengthy hearing, and we want to make sure every member gets their 5 minutes uninterrupted to be able to ask these important questions in this very bipartisan hearing today. I now recognize Director Cheatle for your opening statement.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Comer, Ranking Member Raskin, and distinguished members of the committee. My name is Kimberly Cheatle, and I am the Director of the United States Secret Service. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today. The assassination attempt of former President Donald Trump on July 13th is the most significant operational failure of the Secret Service in decades, and I am keeping him and his family in my thoughts. I would like to offer my sincerest condolences to the family of Corey Comparator, a former fire chief and a hero who was killed in this senseless shooting. I would also like to acknowledge those who were injured in Butler, David Dutch and James Copenhagen, and I wish them a speedy recovery. I would be remiss if I did not also extend my condolences on the passing of your colleague, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. Ms. Jackson Lee was always engaged in the oversight of the Secret Service, and her passing is a great loss to this body. The Secret Service's solemn mission is to protect our nation's leaders. On July 13th, we failed. As a director of the United States Secret Service, I take full responsibility for any security lapse of our agency. We are fully cooperating with ongoing investigations. We must learn what happened, and I will move heaven and earth to ensure that an incident like July 13th does not happen again. Let me state unequivocally, nothing I have said should be interpreted to place blame for this failure on our federal, state, or local law enforcement partners who supported the Secret Service in Butler. We could not do our job without them. We rely on the relationships built over years of working together to secure events and conduct investigations. Our agents, officers, and support personnel understand that every day we are expected to sacrifice our lives to execute a no-fail mission. As witnessed on July 13th, our special agents shielded former President Trump with their own bodies on stage while shots were being fired. Selflessly willing to make the ultimate sacrifice without hesitation, I am proud beyond words of the actions taken by the former president's detail, the counter-sniper team who neutralized the gunman, and the tactical team who was prepared to act. I will be transparent as possible when I speak with you, understanding, though, at times that I may be limited in providing a thorough response in this open setting due to associated risks with sharing highly sensitive protective methodologies. I do not want to inadvertently provide you today with inaccurate information. Since January 1st, 2024, the Secret Service has successfully secured over 7,500 sites. Every protective advance comes with its own set of challenges and requires a customized mitigation strategy, including specific assets. Security plans are multi-layered, providing 360 degrees of protection. These layers include personnel, technical, and tactical assets, which are a force multiplier for our protective posture. During every advance, we attempt to strike a balance between enabling the protectee to be visible and our protective requirements to be secure. I know this because I have spent 29 years in this agency. I came up through the ranks. I've secured events for every president since President Clinton, supervised on Vice President Cheney's detail, led our training center, oversaw all of the investigations and protective visits in the state of Georgia, supervised on Vice President Biden's detail, and the agency's entire protective mission during the Trump administration. The comprehensive advance process involves collaborative planning between our Secret Service, the protectee's staff, local law enforcement partners, and the level of security provided for the former president increased well before the campaign and has been steadily increasing as threats evolve. The security plan included a full assessment of the Butler Farm showgrounds to identify security vulnerabilities and craft a security plan for the protectee, attendees, and the public. Immediately following the assassination attempt, I directed the activation of my crisis center. I assembled my executive team to begin surging more protective resources to the former president and to ensure the wellness of our people post-incident, all while securing an active crime scene. I immediately ordered a reevaluation of the Republican National Convention security plan, and I increased the security posture in the National Capital Region for all permanent protectees and sites. At the same time, I initiated a mission assurance investigation within our agency. I have instructed my team that all necessary resources will be dedicated to investigating these matters. We will not rest until we have explored every option, and we will leave no stone unturned. But I want to be clear. I am not waiting for these investigations to be completed prior to making changes. Over the past 2 weeks, we successfully led the planning and execution of the 75th NATO Summit and the Republican National Convention. Over the next few months, we will implement security plans for the Democratic National Convention, the United Nations General Assembly, and have already begun planning and coordinating the 2025 inauguration. It is now more important than ever for the men and women of the Secret Service to remain resilient and to focus on what is necessary to carry out our critical mission. Our agency needs to be adequately resourced in order to serve our current mission requirements and anticipate future requirements. The Secret Service currently protects 36 individuals on a daily basis, as well as world leaders who visit the United States, like Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin. Remind us of that. I have full confidence in the men and women of the Secret Service. They are worthy of our support in executing our protective mission. I will now answer any questions that the committee may have.
Thank you very much, Director Cheatle. We'll now begin our 5 minutes questions, and I will begin. Just for the record, the Secret Service has an annual budget of around $3.1 billion, and I believe around 8,000 employees. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Obviously, there were many security failures on the day of the attempted assassination and leading up to that day. Let's start with the building that the shooter used to shoot President Trump from. At any point Saturday, did the Secret Service have an agent on top of that roof?
Sir, I'm sure, as you can imagine, that we are just 9 days out from this incident, and there's still an ongoing investigation. And so I want to make sure that any information that we are providing to you is factual.
You can't, okay. Why did the Secret Service not, can you answer why the Secret Service didn't place a single agent on the roof?
We are still looking into the advanced process and the decisions that were made.
Okay. Wasn't that building within the perimeter that should be secured? Do we agree with that?
The building was outside of the perimeter on the day of the visit. But again, that is one of the things that during the investigation we want to take a look at and determine whether or not other decisions should have been made.
One of the things that you said, I believe, in an interview, that there wasn't an agent on the roof because it was a sloped roof. Is that normal, and do you fear that immediately creates an opportunity for future would-be assassins to look for a slanted roof? I mean, this is a huge question that every American has. Why wasn't a Secret Service agent on the roof? And there have been reports that agents were supposed to be on the roof, but it was hot that day and they didn't want to be on the roof. Can you answer any of those questions, Director?
So I appreciate you asking me that question, Chairman. I should have been more clear in my answer when I spoke about where we place personnel in that interview. What I can tell you is that there was a plan in place to provide overwatch, and we are still looking into responsibilities and who was going to provide overwatch. But the Secret Service in general, not speaking specifically to this incident, when we are providing overwatch, whether that be through counter snipers or other technology, prefer to have sterile rooftops.
Did the Secret Service use any drones for surveillance that day?
So again, I'm not going to get into specifics of that day in itself, but there are times during a security plan that the Secret Service does deploy an asset like a drone.
There were reports that the shooter used a drone just a few hours before the rally start time. Is that accurate?
I have heard those same reports, and again, am waiting for the final report.
Do you know, if you can't answer the question, that's your answer. But can you answer this? Do you know, I'm not asking yes or no, but do you know if the shooter used a drone before the shooting?
That information has been passed to us from the FBI.
How many Secret Service agents were assigned to President Trump on the day of the rally?
Again, I'm not going to get into the specifics of the numbers of personnel that we had there, but we feel that there was a sufficient number of agents assigned.
There are reports that several agents assigned to the rally on July 13th were temporary agents not normally assigned to President Trump. Is that accurate?
What I can tell you is that the agents that were assigned to former President Trump are Secret Service agents that provide close protection to him, and that was what was actual on that day.
How many temporary agents were there that day?
Quite frequently, sir, during campaign events, the Secret Service utilizes agents from HSI or the Department of Homeland Security.
You don't know how many?
Supplement
you can't answer?
Our plan.
Have the investigators reconstructed the shooter's precise movements over the past days, weeks, and months?
So, again,
we need to have confidence that if the FBI is leading this investigation, that they're leading a credible investigation, because there's some of us sitting up here today that don't have a lot of confidence in the FBI. So I will repeat the question. Have the investigators reconstructed the shooter's precise moments over the past days, weeks, and months?
I understand your question, Chairman, and I share your concerns about wanting to make sure that we have factual information. The FBI is conducting a criminal investigation. The Secret Service is conducting an internal investigation. There are a number of OIG investigations, and there is the external investigation that the President
Last question for me. Before July 13th, had the Trump detail requested additional resources?
What I can tell you is that for the event on July 13th, the details that were the assets that were requested for that day were given.
Okay. My time has expired. Chair now recognizes Ranking Member Raskin for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's been reported that before former President Trump got up on the stage at around 6 p.m. on Saturday, July 13th, that the local police had identified and even photographed a man who was acting suspiciously. And this man, who turned out to be the gunman, had been flagged as a potential threat. Is that accurate?
What I can say is that the individual was identified as suspicious.
So he was known to be suspicious before former President Trump took the stage.
That is the information I have received.
Why was he allowed to take the stage with a suspicious person having been identified in the crowd?
So I appreciate the question, and I'd like to make 2 points. If the detail had been past information that there was a threat, the detail would never have brought the former president out onto stage. That is what we do, and that is who we are. We are charged with protecting all of our protectees.
So you distinguish between someone who is suspicious and someone who's threatening, is that right?
I do. There are a number of times at protective events where suspicious people are identified, and those individuals have to be investigated and determined what is it that identifies that person as suspicious.
So did you deny a request for additional resources that had been made by the Trump campaign?
There were no assets denied for that event in Butler on the 13th.
I see. So you're saying there were requests made for additional assistance for other specific events rather than for the campaign as a whole. Is that right?
I'm sorry, I'm not understanding.
Well, you seem to say that there were not additional resources requested for that event. And forgive me for being unfamiliar with this. Is it requested event by event, or is it requested just in general for the campaign?
So if I can explain the advance process, when an event or a venue is identified by, in this case, campaign staff, then the campaign staff works together with Secret Service agents who go out and conduct an advance. Generally, that is a 5-day time period where those discussions are had about what the perimeter is going to look like, what the size of the event is, what the venue is, and then from there, there is a request made to mitigate potential risk and threat. And I'm saying that on that day, the requests that were pushed forward were granted.
So the Secret Service did not know that the gunman actually had a weapon before President Trump was allowed to get up on the stage?
To the best of our knowledge and the facts that we have at this point, that is correct.
So can you answer this question, which I think is on the mind of most Americans thinking about this? How can a 20-year-old with his father's AR-15 assault weapon climb onto a roof with a direct 150-yard line of sight to the speaker's podium without the Secret Service or local police stopping him?
So again, sir, I will say we are 9 days out from this event, and I would like to know those answers as well, which is why we are going through these investigations to be able to determine that fully. Okay.
It's been reported that the shooter was not carrying a driver's license or any form of identification. They had no idea who he was, but then he was quickly identified, I think within 30 minutes, by using the serial number on the AR-15 under a tracing system that is now controversial. Some people say we should get rid of it. Some people want to keep it. But is that right, that the serial number was the key information which led to the identification of the shooter?
That is my understanding, sir, yes.
Okay. If an American citizen were just to stop you and say, Director Cheatle, we support your work to the tune of billions of dollars and thousands of employees, what went wrong? What would you say?
Again, knowing that we're 9 days out, I would say, as I have said from the very outset, I accept responsibility for this tragedy. We are going to look into how this happened, and we are going to take corrective action to ensure that it never happens again.
Well, I appreciate that, and I hope you will act with vigor and focus and intensity, and it seems you understand the gravity and solemnity of this to the American people. Millions and millions of Americans don't feel safe with all the AR-15s out there. We thought at least the President of the United States or a former President of the United States would be safe, but now that's not even clear. Mr. Chairman, I yield back to you.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes Chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, Mr. Jordan from Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, were you guessing or lying? The day after President Trump is shot, Secret Service spokesman Anthony Guglielmi said, quote, "The assertion that a member of the former president's security team requested additional security resources that the U.S. Secret Service or the Department of Homeland Security rebuffed is absolutely false." The next day, Secretary Mayorkas said, "That is an unequivocally false assertion. We had not received any request for additional security measures that were rebuffed." But 5 days later, the Washington Post said this: "Top officials repeatedly rejected requests from Donald Trump's security detail for more personnel." The next day, the New York Times said this: "Mr. Guglielmi acknowledged that the Secret Service had turned down some requests for additional federal security assets for Mr. Trump's detail." So which is it? Because both statements can't be true. Were you guessing or lying when you said you didn't turn down requests from President Trump's detail?
Neither, sir, and I appreciate the question.
Well, what were you doing? Because those statements don't jive.
So what I can tell you is that for the event in Butler, there were no requests that were denied. As far as requests...
Well, maybe they got tired of asking. Maybe you turned them down so darn much, they said, not worth asking. How many times did you turn them down ahead of that?
I think that it is important to distinguish between what some people may view as a denial of an asset or a request.
Well, is Mr. Guglielmi your spokesperson? He said he acknowledged the Secret Service had turned down some requests. I'm asking how many?
A denial of a request does not equal a vulnerability.
Well, tell me what it is.
There are a number of ways that threats and risks can be mitigated with a number of different assets, whether that be through personnel, whether that be through technology, or other resources.
Well, tell the committee which it was. They asked for additional help in some form or another. You told them no. How many times did you tell them no, and what did you tell them no to?
Again, I cannot speak to specific incidents, but I can tell you in general terms, the Secret Service is judicious with their resources based on...
What does some requests mean? How many times? Some indicate requests is plural. So more than once they asked for additional help and you turned them down. What did they ask for and how many times did you turn them down? Pretty basic questions.
So again, without having all of the details in front of me, sir, what I can tell you is that there are times...
You didn't get briefed on how many times you turned down the Trump detail when they asked for additional help?
I'm sorry.
You didn't get briefed on that before you came to this hearing, knowing you were going to get asked that question?
What I can tell you is that in generic terms, when details make a request, there are times that there are alternate ways to cover off on that threat or that risk.
But that's not what he said. He said they were denied certain requests, requests. This is your spokesperson, not me talking. This is the Secret Service talking. And what a change from absolutely false, unequivocally false to, oh, by the way, there were some times where we didn't give them what they wanted. That's a huge change in 5 days. And the fact that you can't answer how many times you did that, that's pretty darn frustrating, not just for me, but for the country.
I hear your frustration.
Let me ask you this. Were any of those requests denied to President Trump's detail after you knew about the Iranian threat?
What I can tell you, again, I don't know the specifics, is that there are times when we can fill a request. It doesn't necessarily have to be with a Secret Service asset or resource. We can fill that request with locally available assets.
You spoke to anyone at the White House since July 13th?
Yes, I have.
Who'd you talk to?
I have briefed the President and the Vice President.
Talked to the First Lady?
No, I have not.
Talked to the White House staff? Anyone in the White House communications?
No, I have not.
Have you talked to the counter sniper who took the shot that took out the bad guy?
Yes, I have.
And can you tell us about that conversation?
I would not want to reveal conversations that I've had with my employees.
But that's exactly the kind of information the American people want to know. American people who pay your salary.
I understand. This is an ongoing investigation. And
Who's all doing the investigating at Secret Service? I know the Inspector General, but is there also an internal investigation in addition to the Inspector General?
We are conducting a mission assurance investigation internally, yes.
You know what it looks like, Director? It looks like you won't answer some pretty basic questions. It looks like you got a 9% raise and you cut corners when it came to protecting one of the most important individuals, most well-known individuals on the planet. A former president, likely the guy who's going to be the next president. It looks like you guys were cutting corners. That's what it looks like to me. Is that true?
I am here today because I want to answer questions, but I also want to be cautious.
You might want to, but you haven't answered. I don't think you've answered one question from the chairman, the ranking member, or me. Well, we got a lot of other people asking. We'll see if your record improves. But right now, you haven't answered, I don't think, any questions. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes.
Okay. Final thoughts for the day. Something just to think about as we were listening to testimony provided by Ms. Cheatle, and the very important job that she has, that the Secret Service, as we know it, with protecting valuable people and valuable assets to the United States and those who are visiting the United States, visiting on the U.S. soil, they are protecting a brand of democracy. And the best way that we can actually help these men and women who would do such jobs, even those who would be doing this sort of work in Canada, the UK, France, wherever they may be, the best way we can help them do their job and protect people is by showing up to vote. As we know that that by the time you're hearing this, that President Biden has stepped out of the Democratic race, and that Vice President Kamala Harris is stepping into that race, and at this point has raised over $100 million towards her campaign in a unprecedented short amount of time. The money is going to help her travel and spread her message across the United States, of course, but it is ultimately up to us to show up to vote and cast a vote for that person who we believe to be best suited for the job. It doesn't matter if you're not in the United States and there's elections coming up in your area. You need to show up and vote. It is the only way to have a true effect on what is happening in our society, is to vote, and to vote for those who would promote what you believe are the right things to have in our community. It is that important, and we want to thank you again for listening and helping us spread the word, the love, and we ask you at this time to toss us some support and subscribe. This show has been produced by Depictions Media. Please contact us at depictions.media for more information.